expansion of the universe, contraction back in. I wish I was smarter. Expansion of the universe, contraction back in. And what role do the other dimensions play in this equation? Expansion, contraction, other dimensions. Does God live in that other dimension? On the other dimensions? This is sounding so science fiction. Expansion, contraction, and what role does other dimensions play in this? So I think you have the Big Bang, so all the mass in the entire universe super compact into one point, and because positives and negatives they're always going to repel each other. No, two positives or two negatives will always repel each other. It always has to be positive and negative. Sorry, I misspoke. So if you have a positive, and a negative, two positives always repel each other. And if you have all the mass at the beginning of the universe for trillions and trillions and trillions of years, the mass pulling it in versus the positives and negatives pushing apart for all the time. And then the force of positive and negative pushing apart, positives and negatives pushing apart, overpowering the gravitational force of the mass pulling it all back in. And you have an explosion outward. So for there to be no God or no higher power, it would be the same fate every single time. You would have the positives and the negatives overpowering the mass, the gravitational forces created by the mass, exploding out, and then all the molecules eventually clumping back together, coming back together, creating larger and larger and larger and larger masses. And then eventually large masses pull into other larger masses, and then other larger masses pull into other larger masses, and then over a 1 trillion years, over 1 trillion years, 2 trillion years, 3 trillion years, all these masses eventually come back together at the same point. and then exploding back out. And then the result would be the same every single time. The universe would look different, but the thing is, okay, the universe would look different. Would be certain parts of the universe would look different. Right? Because explode apart, and certain clumps would form here, and certain clumps would form here, and clumps would be slightly different. But the end result would still be the same, because eventually it would just compel back in to itself and then explode out again. And then it would clump together, clump together, clump together, clump together, creating more mass, creating more and more mass, creating more mass, pulling in, and then over a period of time, it'd pull back in, and then it would expand back out. And the result would be the same every single time. It's just I think I understand it, actually. No, it's just me, sweetie. Just give me a minute, please. Give me a minute. No. Go find her. She's in your room, maybe. I think I got it. I think I'm understanding it. The whole universe is all just a series of mass and the gravity created by that mass versus positives and negatives repelling against each other. And then it would just be eventually you would have the same conclusions. I'm losing it. You would have the same conclusions every time. You'd have to have the same conclusions every time. Star connects with the planets, absorbs the planets. Planets absorb asteroids. Stars absorb other stars. Galaxies merge together with other galaxies. And then more galaxies absorb together to form more galaxies. And then more galaxies absorb together to absorbing more smaller galaxies. And then eventually they're just absorbing back in on itself. And it would just be an eternal loop. But what does the different dimensions, 5, 6, 7, 8, what are the different dimensions playing all this? You have 1 trillion years, and then just the result would be the same. And that's the cycle of the universe. It's just a constant, it's like a constant mass versus the repelling force of positives and negatives. I got it. That's awesome. That's what the universe is. If you're really making it really simple, that's what it would be. But the thing is, though, I don't know if it was, instead of it happening every 1 trillion years, it happens 100 trillion times every nanosecond. And there's so much energy expanding out and then being forced back in because of the mass. And then there's an outside force that changes the equation just for a second, allowing for the expansion to happen, the outward expansion to happen. So that's what I don't understand right now. That's where I'm at right now. The mass, the gravitational force created by the mass versus positives and negatives repelling each other. So you got force pulling it in, gravity pulling it in, positives and negatives pulling it away, pushing it away. And that's happening 100 trillion times a second. And then an outside force coming in and changing the equation, giving it that extra force to allowing it to escape. Or you having it every 1 trillion years, 2 trillion years, mass, and then you got the positives and negatives propelling away, and then they spread out. They spread out because of like a dispersal pattern from an explosion, and then all the different forms of energy collecting in on itself, and then slowly absorbing back in over a longer period of time. I'm gonna tighten up this video, and I'm gonna show this to Dave, my buddy. Yeah, I'm gonna tighten this up, and I'm gonna tighten this video up. I think I figured something out. This is cool. Good night.